Today, we're talking about simplicity in spiritual practice and how that simplicity can give us room for surprises and reversals or respite. This time of year can be a wild ride, whether you are buffeted by the surprise deadlines and commitments that pop up between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, or the whims of the market, or official actions that target vulnerable people, or the stress of being human, or just by being present to the transformational power of the season. One of the ways to cope with all of that uncertainty is through spiritual practice, including, but not limited to, prayer. In some ways, spiritual practice puts us in a vulnerable position, one where we might need to acknowledge that we don't control the universe, or a position where we admit that we need help, or one where we dare to hope. That takes courage. And when I was a teenager, there was an elder in my community who modeled this courage. I remember I settled into the folding chair, straining my eyes under the fluorescent lights in the church social hall. The accordion walls and room dividers crossed paths to form 4 classrooms. My brothers were doing arts and crafts in the religious education building, but I had graduated from the children's program, so I got to choose an adult class for the new learning community hour. I looked around at the adults, all at least twice my 15 years. A woman I will call Florence led the class. She had been a fixture in the congregation for as long as I could remember. She invited us to open by repeating the Lord's Prayer together. And I sat right next to her, and so I heard her clearly as she started to pray. And I had never realized until that moment that Florence used inflection as she prayed. I had learned this prayer by rote. I had always heard the line break in the middle, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." But she went right on through, "Thy will be done on earth." Florence said the prayer like she meant it, not like she was reading words off of a page. She sounded like she really thought the name was hallowed. And I cocked my head to look at Florence. I had always thought that she was a calm, respectable person. I had never known her to erupt into fits of religious fervor. Could it be that this pillar of my mainline liberal Protestant church was a believer? My ears roared with fear of this small woman with a big prayer. Luckily, I did not react out of my fear in that moment, but I sat through my discomfort. And in later years, I lived and learned about neighbors with all kinds of religious and spiritual traditions. I learned to appreciate it when someone shared a moment of sincere prayer that gave comfort. I eventually tried it for myself, and I learned to love the physicality of speaking the words of prayer or meditation and letting that sensation awaken my heart and my soul. It seems like every once in a while, those of us who find value in organized religion find it necessary to remember the value of disorganized religious experience, direct experience with transcending mystery and wonder. We gather in religious communities in order to be held accountable, lest our spiritual practices become stale and meaningless. In this morning's story, the scholar is reminded by the shepherd that the prayer of the heart is the true prayer. It brings comfort and hope to all who hear it. The prayer completed without care is a word without wings. And at this point, I want to stop to do some translating. This is a pluralistic community. We have a lot of ways of expressing our Unitarian Universalism. Some practices are contemplative, like chanting or meditation. Service is very important in our tradition, and I know many here concentrate on service as their prayer. And as I think about UUs, I know I can count on the practitioners of at least a dozen embodied traditions: Tai Chi, yoga, Aikido, sacred dancing, labyrinth walking, and others. Some of us pray to God or goddesses or a divine force. Others don't find ideas like God or divinity useful. For today, let's try defining prayer as a deliberate practice that reconnects us with the source of blessing as we understand it to be, and that reinforces positive intention. Whether it's community service or yoga or talking to God or chanting or any other practice, prayer is a deliberate and spiritually connective practice that reinforces positive intention. Another way I'd like to make room in this discussion is by saying that in prayer, it is often a good idea to let go of outcomes. In prayer or meditation or other kinds of spiritual practice, we can express hope, but even the most faithful do not get exactly what they want every time. It's a spiritual practice, not a vending machine. Prayer for me is a way of opening up awareness, holding people and the planet in love, and reconnecting with the understanding that I am held by the source of love. Whether or not you believe that God or the universe makes changes in response to requests made in prayer, spiritual practice changes us, and changing us can help us get ready to change the world in positive ways. Prayer helps me to notice and act on opportunities to be better, to do better, and to organize with other people in doing the work of justice and compassion. Connection with transcendent mystery and wonder comes to us in many ways. Sometimes we cultivate it by regular spiritual practice. Sometimes that connection comes to us spontaneously, such as in nature or while listening to sacred music. The prayer of the heart seeks out and draws from the source of blessing as we understand it to be. Did you hear a change recently in the ambient music all around you? Advent doesn't officially start until next week, but the last gates of restraint on winter holiday music opened up on Friday. We are going to hear about Christmas whether we like it or not. So you might have been reminded recently of another story about shepherds who were out in the fields keeping watch over their flock by night. Both in the nativity story and with the folk from this morning's wisdom tale, shepherds represent simplicity. They are people we can identify with. They have jobs. They don't necessarily understand what's going on most of the time. They feel vulnerable to the elements. In the nativity story, the shepherds find transcendent wonder. They are both inspired and terrified by the angels. A sense of awe and wonder can spur us to action. In the case of the shepherds, their course of action leads to a human baby in a trough usually reserved for animal feed. And this is the pinnacle of their religious experience. And this is what I mean by surprises and reversals. To be connected with a spiritual life is to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that we might have something left to learn, that the foundations of what we assumed about the way the world works might be turned upside down. Those who are learned may be ignorant in some important ways. Those who are powerful may yet yield to a reconciliation with the people. The last shall be first. The physical world is not lower or less holy than the unseen world. The incarnate world, the embodied world of babies and domestic animals and shepherds and fields is divine. The shepherds in the folk story notice the divinity of wool, a grassy field, a clear stream, and the starry night. Direct experience with the physical world inspires the shepherds in both stories. When I remember to connect with the physical world, I am inspired to give thanks for that sense of wonder. The prayer of the heart is a grounded prayer. It fosters a love affair with the physical world, a sense of transcendence rooted in immanence. The prayer of the heart teaches us to love the incarnate. I remember the time when flour and salt squished through our fingers, being transformed from pantry items into a craft project. My partner is telling me about the Sunday school curriculum she's writing on prayer. There's this idea in Judaism, she says, about keva and kavana. Keva means the set text of the prayer, the words as they are written in the prayer book. But the words of the prayer, the mechanics, are only half of it. There's also kavana, the intention. You mean to do the practice, you're actively engaged in it. So she says, I'm going to have one bowl with crusty, dry salt dough. That dough has a lot of keva. The salt and the flour represent structure. Another bowl with goopy, slimy salt dough has a lot of kavana. The water represents a spiritual intention, lots of overflowing love. And if you mix the two together, you get dough that's not too dry and not too goopy. I had heard before of kava and kavana, and it hadn't occurred to me that it was a useful concept for most people, including third graders. But why not? The balance between structure and spirit is a dynamic that affects a lot of us. Spiritual teachers like my family and other loved ones remind me to notice where I am on that balance. I look back on times in my life when I didn't want to conform to a method or to open myself up to a faith community. I just wanted to have my groovy personal experience with whatever spiritual experiment was bringing me comfort or fun. And I could have used more kava in those moments to help me stay grounded in responsibility. I can look back at service projects, martial arts classes, rituals, when I just wanted to get the technique right or rush through the motions, not allowing the experience to settle into my heart and soul. I could have used more kavana in those moments. Some days I need one more than the other. In meditation, in gardening, in expressions of gratitude around the dinner table, sometimes my spiritual practices are more focused on structure, and sometimes my practices are more infused with intention. There are days when my heart is too heavy to be fully present. On those days, I hang on to the structure. Keeping up my practice on uninspired days opens the way for those other times when the intention affects my outlook on life and allows me to appreciate the interdependent web. If I have too many days in a row of all kava and not kavana, I start to get cranky. I forget about cooperating with the natural flow of things. My back droops with the weight of resentment. My body tenses as I cling to ideas and goals that have outlived their usefulness. My throat closes up, guarding against the eruption of laughter. And when that happens, I might reconnect with kavana again by remembering Florence and her heartfelt prayer. I learned from her that praying from the heart shines like a multitude of angels. And just when I'm sore afraid, I remember, have courage, love the incarnate, pray like you mean it. I spoke earlier about all of the ways Unitarian Universalists hold spiritual practice. If you walk a labyrinth, walk like you mean it. Be mindful of your intention to walk or travel or roll in the ways of the UU tradition. If you chant, remember that your voice is joined with others in this congregation. If service is your prayer, remember that service is your prayer and that you have a faith community that backs you up. Whatever your practice, pray like you mean it. Let your prayer be simple and true. Let the words and actions bring comfort and hope to all who witness them. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.